What's going on? This is Hoppy Hour. I am your host, Ryan Hoppy, and on the phone line is a guy I grew up listening to because I'm originally from Chicago. The one and only Mike North is on Hoppy Hour. What's up, man?
Oh, Hoppy Hour. It's about time, for God's sake. I've been waiting for 10 years.
I know.
Finally hit the big time. What's up, Ryan?
Nothing much, man. I've changed as an interviewer since I had you on when everything was pre-written. I was doing a show with my other friend Ryan at the radio trade class I went to, and all we talked about was like probably Jay Cutler and I think Mark Trestman at that point. So it's a totally different interview, totally different vibe now.
Oh, that's cool, man. And, now all we're talking about here is what's going to happen to Mitch Trubisky. The Bears screwed that one up, and we've heard that any one of 20 quarterbacks was coming here, and it looks like we might be stuck with the same guy we had last year in Nick Foles. It's just a carnival. You know that. You grew up here, so the Chicago Bears are the carnival, the circus that never leaves town.
Well, the thing about the Bears, too, I saw a post. I don't know where I saw it on social media. I think I saw Sylvie like it, and then it showed up on my feed that pretty much the Russell Wilson to the Bears idea is like when Kobe Bryant in 2004 said he wanted to play for the Bulls, that it's kind of like that.
Yeah, it's like a lot of noise. The Bears don't even have enough cap room. They've blown money on defensive players. I mean, not that they're bad defensive players, but they gave Eddie Jackson an extension, who's a safety that he made a ton of money. He's going to make a ton of money over 4 years with no interceptions last year after having a great rookie season. And then you got Khalil Mack, who's making $146 million. I mean, the Bears are the only team that seem to think that it's still 1980. Where you spend money on defense and you don't spend any money on offense. So we're hoping that, if they screwed the Mitch Trubisky thing up, he's 29-21, 10,000 yards. He made the playoffs last year with this team. They screwed that up because Nagy pulled him after during game 3. Foles, it turned into a bowl of crap, if you will, and they brought Mitch back. They made the playoffs. But what I know from the one person I talked to that's relatively wise with the situation, that's all I'll say, is that Mitch's people told him don't even ask us to come back. And we're here in Washington, maybe his next stop, with Ronnie Rivera, who I worked with at the Score periodically on and off when Ronnie was a sub. Now he's the head coach of the Washington team. That's unbelievable. But I'd like to see him go to Ron Rivera. That would be some sort of street justice, because Ronnie was a Bear. And the McCaskies didn't pick him. They let him go, and they picked Nagy. So this will be interesting.
I think it would be the most Bears thing ever for Mitchell to go to the Washington football team and then do really good.
Oh, listen, I'm willing to give anybody 5-1. You give me 5-1 odds. Here's my proposition bet: that the Bears won't make the playoffs, and Mitch and whatever team he's on will make the playoffs. Now, Mitch may not start, or Mitch may get hurt. He's got to start a minimum of 5 games, but I'll give anyone, if you want to give me 5-1, that means if you decide you want to take that bet, you have to pay me $500 on a $100 bet if Mitch does start in the playoffs and the Bears don't. And I think that's a real possibility. I do. I think it's a possibility. Mitch could go to Denver. Mitch could go to, we've heard Washington. We've heard a little talk of San Francisco. Those are all pretty decent football teams. So he'd be leaving a bad situation with a coach who tried to sabotage his career to go to a better situation.
Now, everybody wants to do sports betting. You got DraftKings, you have Dave Portnoy, who's building his empire. You're one of the originals, though, in the sports media that's really into betting. I don't have any money. I've never had money to bet, but I've always found sports betting to be fascinating.
Well, I'll tell you what. My first show I did on small-time radio back in 1989, it was called the NFL Handicap Show, and me and 2 guys, we rented time, $300 a week for 1 hour. We taped it at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. It would go on at 8 o'clock on Sunday night here in Chicago, but it had very low coverage. It was like a 20,000 watt station, but there was no podcasting back in 1980, 89. You had to buy time. So that's how the whole thing started for me. And So I thought handicapping would be farther along by now. I thought sports gambling would have happened in the early 2000s, but politicians handle it. They don't know what they're doing. They can't handle themselves, let alone try to handle gambling. Gamblers should write the laws on gambling, but like in Illinois, you can't even bet on an Illinois team. So if Illinois is in the finals, in the championship, Ryan,
yeah,
you can't bet them at Rivers in Des Plaines, Illinois, because they banned Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, any teams from Illinois, college pro or pro. How stupid is that?
I mean,
seriously, how stupid is that?
It's weird. It's kind of like how they won't make weed legal everywhere. It's kind of like that. It's like, what's the point? Like, why are you holding back? Just let the people gamble. You know what I mean?
I agree. And the beautiful thing about it, though, is now I'm working at ESPN 1000. I'm entering my 30th year of broadcasting. I didn't get into it till I was till I was 39 or 40. I owned restaurants and stuff, and the Score came along. So I've been very fortunate, but now I'm with Carmen DeFalco, ESPN. I also do Bears Bar Room. I have a podcast there, and I also work for a really great outfit called Win Daily Sports. Give it a follow, folks. And, they come up with cappers. And, I always say I have a pretty good record of handicapping. It's no shame. It's no shame to take bets from somebody that you know is credible and that will post his picks and be documented. I mean, people watch my picks harder, this is the truth, Ryan, than they watch their own financial portfolios. They could lose 30,000 in a day in stocks, but they'll tell me that, hey, Mike, that game you picked last night was a rough one. So, it's very, very interesting. They really hold us to a higher standard than they hold people that actually handle their financial investment.
Did you ever, in the 30 years you've been in the media, did you ever have it, though, where not that you felt guilt, but was there ever a listener who just went over the edge and didn't kill himself, but lost everything?
Well, here's the deal I always said. I don't believe in the 1-800 numbers. I think it's a place where people, if you're addicted to gambling, fine. You know what? I never, and this goes for me too, I give out a lot of winning picks. But honest to God, I've never seen a guy crying on the bench, and I went up to him and I said, "What's the matter?" and he said, "I'm a gambler. I'm a gambler." I go, "Well, what happened?" He goes, "I just got a problem." Well, what's your problem? I won $3,000 last night. I've never heard a winner dial a 1-800 number. It's only the losers that got to go to their wives and say, I blew 10 grand, I need this or I need that. You ask anybody that dials those 1-800 numbers, and I have nothing against it. If you feel you need help, fine. But you ask any of them, you ask any of those counselors, how many of them were winners, and they'll tell you none. Because I won this week. I won, I had yesterday Justin Thomas in the, I won 1,800 bucks on $100 bet. He was plus 18-1. So the last thing I was going to do is call somebody and say, I have a gambling problem. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it's weird, too. Up at WFAN, they have Craig Carton doing the afternoon show, and he's not really talking about gambling, but then, during the break, they're airing, DraftKings commercials. It's very bizarre how you sort of go through the thin line of it, you know?
Oh, no, it's here to stay now. And there are going to be people that are going to be hurting. It's a rough racket. I mean, I've been gambling since I was 14 years old. I've been gambling 54 years. So figure it out. I'm 60 yet. I've been gambling. But I lost. I gave 3 envelopes to every one the first 40 years. Then I figured something out. I figured out the 6 checkpoint system that I have. And this year during football season on ESPN, I was 60%. So, yeah, you got shows like the Daily Wager now, and you got gambling shows. Just keep track of these people. Make sure they're winning for you. Make sure they're doing the right things. Before you decide to bet, if you want to bet, make sure maybe watch these shows for a week or two or listen to shows like mine or anybody and keep track of the records. And see, because a lot of these people are BS artists. You know what I'm saying? They're BS artists. Hey, I went 10-1 last night. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Where'd you go 10-1? You got to find it. It's like anything else, whether it's a lawyer, an accountant, or a handicapper. Find the best one.
I noticed the ones that talk the loudest are the ones that you can't trust. The ones that are like overcompensating are the ones you got to watch out for.
Sharp. You're sharp. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everybody, come on. Dial 1-800-222-2222. I can't lose. This is my giant size game of the month. I watched all those guys growing up. Wayne Root, Stu Finder, all good guys. I watched them. Sometimes they won, sometimes they lost like anybody else. But when they used to, I mean, it's very rare. I'm 39-4 in my last 43 games. No, you're not. You know, but now it's easier to keep track of people because back then there were no computers. There were no ways to keep track. Me, I go on the air and say what I did. And at the beginning of the football season, you'll love this. The first 11 games, I've never been through a stretch like this. I've gone 18-1-1. I've gone 10-1. I've gone 1-15. I went 0-9 my first 3 weeks in the NFL. Now I'm on major radio in Chicago, and I got to go on the air and say that. But then for the rest of the year, I end up being 62%. So you get credibility. If somebody comes on and says, I went 10-0 last night, find out where they went 10-0 and give them a check. Otherwise, take it with a grain of salt.
What is your take on like ESPN, like fantasy sports, like all of it, fantasy baseball, basketball, football?
I've never been a fan, but I've never been a fan where I would play. But in 1993, Jeff Schwartz, who was the promotions guy at the Score, I went up to him and I said, listen, I'd like to try a fantasy show. And, you seem to be into it. And it's relatively new. I think it's going to be big. He goes, well, let's go talk to Ron Gleason, program director. I'm sure you've had discussions with program directors before.
Yes.
And, you're trying. What I used to do until I got along and I established myself is I'd do stuff without asking permission. Then I'd get called in. Well, this was a little bit later on in the Score. I'd established myself. I said, how about fantasy football? A half an hour. And Ron Gleason says, I don't think a half an hour. I mean, fantasy football, I don't think it's going to catch on. I don't think that it's going to be all that. But a long story short, I was the first guy in Chicago to do a half hour fantasy football segment, 2:30 every single Friday. And it turned out really, really good. But I mean, it was minuscule compared to what it is now. I'm more of a bettor. I'm more of a guy that bets the games. But I will play some prop bets on Win Daily once in a while. Who's going to have the most points tonight? I'll play an NBA player. Will so-and-so have over Jeremiah Grant for the Pistons? Will he have over 24 points tonight? Yes or no? Those are fun too. But I don't get really into it. Usually I just bet the games.
Now, talking about the 90s, I feel like if you're a radio geek or you're a person that works in radio, when you think of radio from there, you think of WLS back in the day, you think of The Loop, think of B96, think of WGCI, but I feel like the impact that 670 had on radio kind of goes overlooked at times because I mean, like, that was a household name. It is now, but I mean, growing up, like, you guys were the kings of that town.
Yeah, we were, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That's the bottom line. I mean, we had a 3-show radio station. We were on from dusk, from dawn to dusk. We didn't have a nighttime license in 1992. We were on 8:20 a.m. Then we went to 11:60, and now we went to 6:70. They gave us. I mean, Chet Kopic told the papers they'll last 6 months. The other people said that guy, that hot dog stand owner, he's a 10th-rate George Wendt impersonator. I mean, they took shots at us. They hated our guts. The electronic media, the TV people, we made them irrelevant. I think the Score did more to hurt the print media, sports print media in Chicago and other venues, like TV anchors like Mark G and Greco's back in the day were so popular. When the Score came, they were all pushed down to second, and they just couldn't handle it. The jealousy and, the envy and the insecurities in the news media are unparalleled. They're as insecure a a group of people as I've ever seen in my entire life, and that's something that they hated us for and still hold grudges against us for, because we basically wiped the newspapers and the TV off the map in Chicago. You know that. You were there. And the Score is going to be celebrating their 30th anniversary next year. And I'm the only guy left that's on terrestrial radio. Everybody else is gone. Who would have guessed that? So I don't know what they're going to do, but I do know this. As far as big-time terrestrial radio, I'll be celebrating my 30th also, because I started, and it was my vision for the Score. Danny Lee picked up the ball, who just passed away recently, the owner. He was a great guy. He had my back. He said, do what you got to do. We're making money hand over fist. Don't worry about it, which is very rare today, because back then it was family owned. A lot of radio stations were family owned. But since he's gone, the Score is the greatest, I think, sports station that ever was, because the Fan was a one-trick pony. The Fan had Mike and the Mad Dog. They came after me and Jiggets to replace Lupica and Berman. So they were a one-trick pony, and they did Imus in the morning. They weren't really from dusk, from a 24-hour sports station. That's what the Score eventually became.
What was the vibe like? Because I don't want to make you feel old, but I was born in 93. So the first time I heard about, I know, I don't want to make you feel old, but the first time
I don't feel old.
That's good. But I didn't really know much about Don Imus until like what happened with 14 years ago. And then I kind of became a fan. I would listen here and there. They would podcast the show. I liked that old type of radio, so I dug it. But like in his prime, from like whenever his prime was, because you'll listen to clips with Opie and Anthony or Howard, and then they make Don Imus seem like he was a nobody, but he made a lot of money and had a ranch and was a household name. In his prime, how impactful was Don Imus to radio?
Oh, Don Imus was, I wasn't a big fan, but here's what happened. When he got into trouble, they flew me in. I did a show for 3 days in New York with the guy that you just brought up that works afternoons, Chris.
Yes.
And them. And Imus' sidekick, the guy with the glasses. I did the show for 3 days in New York. They flew me in on a private jet and everything.
What was that
Don
like?
Imus, I met. Oh, it was awesome. I've taken him before, but I think because I got paid extravagantly. They used to pay radio guys that did the job, a lot of money. They don't do that no longer. They try to pinch pennies now, but it was awesome. I was at the Waldorf Astoria 3 days there. I sat in for Don Imus. I met him, older at the time, a little bit gruff, stuff like that, just like on the radio, just like on TV. I think the key to any is how if you don't have to change too much from your everyday existence to when you go on the air. I never changed. If you see me here tomorrow, let's say me and you were walking down the street, we'd have the same conversation like we're having now. I mean, I didn't have to, hey, everybody, how you doing? Or, hey, welcome to the Score. We're here. Just be yourself. That's the best way, and it worked out. Don Imus was himself. Howard Stern he came to Chicago. He didn't really do well here. He did okay. I was more of a Steve Dahl guy. I grew up, I worked for the Park District in the 80s. I'd have the Walkman on listening to Steve Dahl. And then later on, I ended up beating him in the ratings. How crazy is that? Years later, because somebody gave me an opportunity. So, it's just been it's a wonderful venue. You've been doing it for a long time, and you love it. People that do it love it for the most part. The people that do it for the money, that's when they fall off the shelf.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you, because like when you look up Mike North online, it'll talk about the money you made, like on your Wikipedia page. And here's what I wanted to ask you. So I like to keep up with all the radio guys I grew up with. So like if you Google or if you go on Facebook and you look up Jobo, he put up this whole post about how all the money he made and then how it was a blessing and a curse. And then I read an article from Man Cow, maybe from like 2013. And he was sort of talking about how he did it in like third person, but I think it was more about him in a way. He was talking about how when you make it, if you have a hard time sleeping at night or you have demons, those don't just go away, and having it all isn't always the best thing. Now, he didn't exactly say it was about him, but the way he said it and the way he says things, it seemed like it was about him because it was talking about like how big he was. For you, Mike, when you were at the top of your game, when you were making all that money, was there a part of you that was like afraid? How were you maintaining and handling having those 7 figures?
I could have handled it better. I think I could have handled it better. I could have handled it worse, though.
Yeah.
You got to remember, people talk, Ryan, about athletes that are, he's an 18, 19-year-old kid, 20 years old, they're giving him all this money. How's he going to handle it? Okay, he hasn't had that much, though, experience beforehand. Give a 45-year-old man who was making $50,000 a year selling hot dogs, $1.5 million all of a sudden. Give him the lead show on a radio station. I mean, I wasn't completely ready for it. I didn't make that kind of money right away. I'll give you my chronological order. I signed with the Score for $45,000 in 1992. 6 months later, they came back to me. They said, you're going to get a 6-month trial. I worked with Jiggets. 6 months later, they come back. They go, we're going to give you a 2-year deal at $75,000. Out of nowhere. So I get a $30,000 raise. Now, this is 1992, right?
Yeah.
Now, about 2 years later, Mark Chernoff from WFAN calls and says, I'd like to meet with you guys, you and Jiggets at O'Hare. Jiggets, he called Jiggets, and Jiggets tells me, I go, who's he? He goes, he's the head of WFAN. I go, what's he want? Now, you got to remember, I'm just a hot dog guy. We're making we're making $75,000, $80,000. He wants to meet us. I go, the guy from New York wants to meet us? He goes, yeah, we got to go to, well, Chernoff offered us $210,000 for 3 years each. So I go back to Danny Lee. Danny Lee checks it out, says it's true. He matches it. 3 years later, Larry Wirt and Jimmy DeCastro, who are from the Loop that you mentioned, they meet me. They want to start a sports station. I think it was 95, 96, called WMVP. They offered me $700. I went back to Danny Lee. Boom, got that. And then a few years later, I fly to Washington, Potomac, when Howard Stern quit and Brandmeier quit the same day. Then I had a gut feeling. This is the honest to God truth. I'd never had an agent, Ryan. I told my wife, I'm going to find out where Dan Mason's office is. She goes, who's Dan Mason? I go, he's the president of Westinghouse. I think it was, or CBS at the time. I forget which company, because the Score started getting sold. Oh, it was CBS because Stern had just left in Brandmeier. I fly into Potomac, Maryland. And the next day, I'm sitting in the reception of his office, and he walks in. He goes, who are you? I go, I'm Mike North. He goes, what are you doing here, Mike? I go, I took the day off. I wanted to come down and talk contract with you. I got 2 years left on the deal, paying me $7. I know you just lost Stern and you lost Brandmeier. Yeah, he goes, that's rough. I'm willing to stay. I'm willing to work over under the old deal for $7 for 2 years. But then I want a 5-year extension. He goes, how much you want? I said, I had talked to other agents. They said the most I'd get is $1 million. I said 1.5. He looks at me. He says, that's doable. I signed a 5-year deal that afternoon, and I flew home.
So is it all about the way you walk into the room and present yourself, and you walk in knowing that you're the best in the room in your own mind?
You go over it the night before. I'm at the Embassy Suites, which was in Virginia, right outside of Potomac, somewhere around there. And I had to drive a little bit. And I said, I took a cab, but I said, I'm going through it. And I had no hesitation. I was sure of myself. I knew that I was worth it. And I went and got it. And, then the envy comes in, the jealousy, not only from other people outside of outside of your station, but at the station, So you have to put up with a little bit of that. But on the whole, it's the most unbelievable I think it would never happen today because I'm a high school dropout to begin with. They would never even talk to me. I mean, they've changed radio. So was Steve Dahl. He was a high school dropout. Stern was off old school. Mancow.
Anthony.
I mean, I know Eric.
Opie and Anthony,
and
yeah.
I'll give you one. Yeah, Opie and Anthony. I'm friends with them. Look, I'll tell you this. The one thing that's the pressure, you're never going to make that money all for the rest of your life. I always knew because I was older, I will fall. I will go up and I will go down like everybody else does. I just want to tread water, But then after I left the Score, I was like in limbo for a couple of years until I got with Fox Sports Radio. But I paid me so much money back then, Ryan, that, I made investments and everything else. I mean, I'm set up because of the money they paid me back in the 90s. But I've been paid well since. I get paid well by ESPN, but nothing like that. And they'll never. I'm the highest paid local sports talk host in the history of the game. I made more than Chris Russo. I made more than Chris Russo at the time. So I'm proud of it, but it is an albatross around your neck, and I had some issues, and I had some problems too. Money, and drinking and hanging out and partying and being the toast of the town. It's got its good things and it's got its bad things, just like anything else.
So you're a fascinating guy in the way that whenever you're in a Robert Feeder article or whatnot, you're sort of like Mancow or Eddie and Jobo in the way where 50% of the people either love you or hate you. So you're this outspoken guy. You've had TV shows, radio shows. Who is the real Mike North? Because you've said outspoken things on air. You've been, I don't want to say a loudmouth, but you've been so outspoken.
That's fine.
Who is the real Mike North for everybody that doesn't know you? You know what I mean?
Well, now I see the real Mike North. I've been sober for 14 years. I'm not going to say, but I'm not one of those guys that I didn't go to meetings and all that crap. I just quit on my own. But I've always been a good guy. I'm a loyal guy. I'm a guy that will help somebody out. But I guess right now, after being sober 14 years, I'm and not working the everyday grind like I used to. I'm a good family guy now. We just got a new puppy, me and my wife. BB and I have been together married 43 years. We've known each other 46 years. We have a great marriage now. And it wasn't, when you're rolling, when you're married 43 years, boy, has it been a great marriage? Yeah, but there's some bumpy roads. There's some bumpy roads because you've been married 43 years. You're going to experience everything. So we've known each other 46 years total. I met her at a grocery store. She was from the neighboring parish. So really now I'm a recluse for the most part. I do most of my stuff from home now. You don't have to go to the studio anymore, which has been great. I'm older. The quarantine thing has been perfect for me because I did everything that you can do. I mean, I partied with Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin, and I partied with Frank Sinatra. Who can say that, as far as a regular guy from Chicago? So I've done it all. I've known them all. I've played ball with Michael Jordan. I've hung out with them. I've known Dennis Farina was a good friend of mine, Hollywood stars. But also, I never lost touch with the regular Joe. I'm always going to be the regular guy that grew up on Broadway and Thorndale in Chicago, just a few blocks away from where Bobby Heenan, the wrestling manager, grew up. Bobby grew up. He went to the same grammar school as me, Swift School, when he first started. He dropped out at 15. They always used to say he's from Beverly Hills. He was from Thorndale and Winthrop in Chicago.
That's what really hit home for me about Chicago radio, that I always dug about you, Eddie and Jobo, Brandmeier, Dahl, Mancow, was that you guys, and just the other well-paid shows, you guys never really talked about your wealth. Everybody knew you guys had mansions. Everybody knew you guys were making bank because Robert Feeder would report it. But the thing with Chicago radio that makes it the best market when it was in its prime was you guys worked so hard to relate to the everyday average Joe, the people that were plowing snow, the people that were working hard, me that was on my school bus negative
Sure.
20 and it's freezing out and my hands are frozen. And a lot of other markets in radio don't really do that. They talk about their mansions, they talk about all their things. But the thing that was and is so special about Chicago radio is, you know, that like Mark Giangreco is making bank, but you're watching him on TV and you feel like you know him. That's what I will always love about Chicago media is while you're watching, there's this magic that causes you to forget that you guys are all millionaires.
Yeah, look. I was really left for dead. They told me I'd never make anything of myself. I mean, I dropped out of high school at 15 years old, went to the beach. I mean, I had a devil may care it. Then I met my wife. We opened up some restaurants. She was the driving force. She's been my driving force. But we never talked about that stuff. And here's another thing I never talked about. I'd go out 3 nights a week downtown, Rush Street or the neighborhood, drink, get home at 2 a.m, get up, go to work. I never took a day off. But I never talk, and I hear other. I don't know if you. Hopefully, you don't do this. I don't think so. But I hear a lot of radio guys back in the day. Oh, my hungover. Oh, I'm tired. I never did that shit. No truck driver wants to hear. No truck driver wants, or some guy busting his tail 12 wants to hear about a radio guy making a lot of money who's hungover from last night. I
hate hearing about the money. I find nothing more repulsive in radio, Mike, than hearing, oh, I got this new mansion, I got this new hot tub, and then you're living in your small apartment. You know, like that's what I always loved about you. You never did that.
Well, you know what's funny is the stuff that you told me about, the regular Joe stuff, I did.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked for the city of Chicago. I worked for the water department. I worked for the park district. I worked for the streets and sand. I had a 12-year career, 15 years. Then I had hot dog stands. I met in factory areas. So when I was 39 and went and tried out for this job and beat out 300 other kids, 300 other guys, they were looking for one more guy. They were looking for a street guy. Well, I think my experience being in Chicago, being older, helped me get it. They showed no prejudice towards age, which they do now in some shops, or anything else. But I did all that stuff, right? I worked my ass off for a living. I had a paper route when I was 12 years old. So I worked at grocery stores. I mean, I did anything I could. So when the guys listened to me, they liked hearing every so often. Last night, Doug Buffone came over to Pappyland. They used to like to hear that stuff, but they knew that they were listening to it. I mean, there were guys working for the park listening to me on the radio that I worked with.
Yeah,
the year before or 2 years before. So that was cool.
I think the thing too is that you were authentic, because I went to a radio trade class and every single month there'd be a new batch of people between the ages of 19 to 52 that wanted to go into sports radio. And I wanted to, like, I don't know what I wanted to do, but then I worked for Rover in Cleveland, got fired, and I moved to Tampa. But what I'm saying is all these people that don't have jobs, I would say 95% of them, all of them were like your typical sports guy you would see on SportsCenter, and all the other ones that are working in major markets, that because there's like maybe 7 classmates out of the whole year 2013 2014 that have jobs. Every single one of them were guys like you or guys like Terry Boers, where they were more authentic and they were themselves. And I feel like the key to any type of medium, comedy, sports media, radio, TV, is you got to just talk like yourselves. You can't be a script reader, you know?
I'll give you one. We go on to Score the first week.
Yes.
I said, boy, Jiggs, I got to tell you, last night I turned one on. I was downtown, had a few pops, had a couple scotch and waters, blah, blah, blah. Ron Gleason calls me in at commercial. You can't say you were out drinking. I go, are you out of your mind? What are you talking about? Say you went out and you had some soda pop or something. Now, you got to remember, most radio PDs are squares.
Yes,
okay?
Of course they are.
They're squares, and they're afraid of their own, most, not all, are afraid of their own jobs. So they hear this for the first time. Hey, how many guys go on the radio today and go, yeah, last night I had about 4 martinis. Got a little rocked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, they don't do that no more. So I do that, and then he calls me in. I go, you want to have an authentic station or not? True story. He goes, what are you talking about? If Mike North, who half this town knows anyway, says he went out and had 4 Diet Cokes last night at Gibson's, it sounds stupid. He goes, well, try to take it easy. I never did. And that's when I learned. I always got called in. I never asked permission, like I told you earlier. And if you did ask permission, they'd always say no. Okay? So you just play dumb. I didn't know. I didn't know I couldn't say this, or I didn't know. I mean, I thought of jagbag. If your listeners out there look up in the Urban Dictionary jagbag, or if you look it up on your computer,
yes,
they'll tell you who invented the name. Me. It says Mike North, Midwestern talk show host, invented jagbag. You know why? So anyway, this is 1993 now, a year later. I go to some caller. You're nothing but a jag. Can I say it?
Yes.
Or no?
Yeah.
You're nothing but a jag off. And the guy goes, why am I? I go, we were arguing. I go, because you're acting like one. Boom. Commercial. Get in here. I go to Danny Lee's like, you can't say that on the air. I go, why not? It said on the. He goes, I go, don't say it again. I go, okay. I go, what am I going to do? They go, you got to think of something else. Literally 5 minutes in, I walk in and Jiggs goes to me, goes, what's wrong? I said, I got in trouble for that. He goes, I knew that was going to happen. I go, yeah. I go, I got to think up a new thing. He goes, what do you mean? I go, instead of what I just said, I got to think up a new thing. And instantly I go, how about jagbag? He goes, Jiggs goes, that sounds good. So all of a sudden, jagbag grew up into every Thursday we did jagbag Thursdays. And everybody would have to end, so-and-so's a jerk and he's a jagbag. Well, if you look up the Urban Dictionary, they heard about it. They heard it was a replacement for the other popular term, and it's in there now. So people use that term all over the country, from what I understand. He's a jagbag, and it started in Chicago in '93.
I find jagoff to be the greatest word ever because not everybody knows about it, but it's the most Chicago thing ever. Oh,
big time. Big time. I mean, it's so Chicago, and I swore a lot as a kid. We smoked. I mean, we played sports, but we smoked, we drank. I mean, we used to have the guy, we had a guy, the local bum pick us up beers, 6-pack of beer for 4 of us, get half in the bag when we were 15 years old on six 12-ounce cans, I mean, those were different days, those were different times. We had fun. We didn't worry about anything. And, they were innocent times, but I was a student. I go back. I know the history of radio, Chicago radio, from Wally Phillips to Marty Fay, to Steve Dahl, to Eric Mancow, to Larry Lujat, to Ron Riley, to Art Roberts, to Catherine Johns, to Fred Winston. I know them all. I grew up on all of them. And when I got on the air, it's just a pleasure. It was a pleasure to be on the air in my own hometown. And I never have had to leave to do radio. Where, like Dick Biondi, who was a friend of mine, the greatest rock and roll jock who ever lived, I think. He's 86 now, but Dick Biondi got fired like 25 different times. He had to go to Myrtle Beach. He had to go do small-time radio and everything else. So everybody goes through hard times. Everybody goes through good times. But you're judged by your career at the end and what kind of impact you had.
Chicago's a weird town because I don't know if you ever heard anything about your accent when you were at Fox Sports, but when I worked for Rover and here at the Bone and like second jobs I've had, everybody's got to make a comment. The way I say the word salad, the way I say the word Aunt Nancy, like everybody loves to rip into the accent. And I never realized how thick my accent was until I moved to Florida and everybody talks normally in a way. And
they think I'm from New York a lot, New York or Chicago. They think I'm from New York and I'm not. I said, well, no, I'm from Chicago. And I said, but I mean, I said stuff like I'll give you some Chicagoese. Okay.
Yes.
Most people in this country say Loyola. Now Loyola is going to be in the final. I mean, in the big dance. I used to say Loyola. Loyola. So like Loyola, it's supposed to be Loyola. You know what else I used to say?
What?
Soldiers Field, not soldier. Soldiers. Chicagoans, a lot of them say Soldiers Field because it never made sense. I know you're supposed to say Soldier, but it's named after the men and women of the armed forces. So why would it be Soldier Field? It should be Soldiers Field. And I used to argue with Chiggs about that. But yeah, those two and the way you say with and birthday, BIRF, happy birthday, stuff like that, you know. It's all good stuff. And George Wendt and those guys did it perfectly. I remember Chet Kopic said to me, "You're a 10th rate George Wendt impersonator." I go, "Are you kidding me? I was around longer before George Wendt. He stole that act from me." You know what I mean?
What was it like being around those loudmouth characters like Mancow, Chet Kopic? Because like you'll read, again, it's similar to you where you'll read everybody either hates Mancow or was a fan of him. People were pretty polite when Chet Kopic died, but during that time in the 90s when everybody would be mingling, what were those characters like off air? You know what I mean? Because like they were so charismatic on air. When you're in Chicago radio, everybody's got an opinion on those shock jocks, I guess. I don't know.
Mancow is a great guy. He treated me great. And when I was out at the Score and I was like just treading water for a while, he had me on his show. I won't forget that. And, you know, he'd bring me in and I'd come in and we had a gas. And I met guys. And a lot of his friends, William Shatner would be there or Michael Madsen from Reservoir Dogs. We became friends. Mancow, to me, is a great guy. He's a family guy. I think that radio, you know, he's got a family. And you know, he's trying to – it's hard to navigate when you were a shock jock or that type of situation in the 90s, and now you got to change a little bit. See, I've never changed for the most part. But Mancow's a great guy. Chet was jealous. Chet was envious. Chet was fearful of the Score. And Chet, I was a big fan of his because I'd be mopping the floor at my restaurant, at my hot dog stand, and I'd listen to him on the loop. And I'd go to my wife. I go, you know what? I should get into this radio thing. And she goes, well, how would you do that? I go, I don't know, but this guy's too vanilla. But I still liked him. But he was very condescending towards us. And so, but I never took it against him. When I saw him, I went to his funeral. I went to Chet's funeral because I felt that he was the guy that made me want to get into radio. And who else? Steve Dawes, a good guy. Most of the guys I've hung out with are pretty good guys. Pretty good guys. The only guy I never met was Brandmeier, but when he came back, I sent him a bottle of champagne. I said, welcome back to Chicago. He couldn't believe it because back then, radio guys were more territorial. I didn't play that game. I was friends with guys at other stations. I could give two craps. I knew where I stood, you know. So that's how I became friends with Eddie Volkman and Howard Sudbury and guys like that. You know, I love Eddie Volkman. Eddie's one of the best. And he's doing smaller radio now. He should be on big time radio, but he made his money. That's what happens. You make your money for as long as you can, and then you got it. Then radio management changes. I worked for Danny Lee, and then all of a sudden he sold the place, and then we had 2 or 3 different owners in the next 12 years I was there.
Eddie and Jobo are a fascinating show because there's virtually nothing online about them. There's a few clips on YouTube, a few air checks, and there would be kind of jokes about them on the WGN Morning News. But man, growing up, dude, like people forget how big of a deal Eddie and Jobo were at B96.
I think that the 90s and 80s will never be matched again.
Oh, of course not. Never.
It will never be matched again. I don't care if you're talking the Loop in 1980, if you're talking WLS from the 60s and 70s, if you're talking, I mean, what they've done to WLS is just horrid. But it really is. I mean, but really, if you're talking about the guys that are on the air today, compared to Jiggets and North, McNeil and Boris, Mancow, Stern was on at the time, Dahl, Lou Jack, Brandmeier. Come on. I don't listen to much radio anymore, sports radio, as it is. But I don't listen to much Chicago radio anymore because it's just not as good as it used to be. If you want to play, list the personalities in the 80s and 90s and list today's personalities. A lot of the personalities today, I'll just go to sports radio route. Some of the guys that are on, and there's like 2-3 sports stations in Chicago. A few of the guys that are on today couldn't have worked weekends at the Score back in the 90s, and they're on every day.
Yeah, I think the one, and I have a slight bias because I've been friends with him for like 9 years, but Fred from Kiss FM, to me, is like the way he came in from the South. To me, that's like your typical Chicago radio because he cares about the city and he puts in enough talk time to music time for it to be a talk show. But man, bro, whenever I come back to Chicago and like I'm going through the radio, it's all either voice tracked from a different market or it's just 7 seconds of talking time. It is not what it was. I think one of the major things in Chicago radio from when I was born in 1993, I think the time when Chicago radio completely changed was when WCKG went off air and then when Eddie and Jobo left B96. To me, that was kind of when it went from being like fun radio to like maybe the 2008, 2009 time was like when Johnny B went off 97.9 the last time. To me, that was like when radio just went off, in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the deal is, I think radio started getting hurt in the 60s, 70s, 80s. When WLS switched from the greatest rock station to the format they're in now, that was the worst. You had the number one rock and roll station in the country, okay, in the 60s and 70s. So that hurt. But you're right. I think attitudes. Look. I'm still working in the woke culture, the PC culture.
Yeah.
Okay. And it a lot of people are gone, and I've managed to hang on as far as not changing my act. I remember a guy telling me, "You're going to have to change your act." What I did is I reinvented myself. There's a difference. I was doing regular talk, but now I got handicapping, wagering talk, which I mix in with my talk, but I don't, it's not as rough. I'm more rough on Twitter. What you read on me with Twitter, believe me, folks, what you see on me on Twitter, I said in the 90s. And if you couldn't say some of the stuff I say on Twitter, now you can't. You can't.
You know whose account is the most fascinating Twitter account I've ever read? Because he doesn't
70?
give enough. Bruce Wolf, dude. That guy tweets whatever is on his mind at any time. It's fascinating.
Yeah. I read a lot of people. You read some disgruntled people, some happy people, some sad people, some simple people. I think the Super 70s guy is the best guy on Twitter.
Oh, yeah, totally.
That guy's hilarious. Are you familiar with him?
Believe it or not, I actually had him at 1025.
He's a good guest, I heard.
Yeah, he was on the Mike O radio show, a show that I produced at 1025 The Bone. Bro, he was the coolest dude ever. I had to email him, like he had his email in his bio. He was like, whenever you need me, I will be on. He was so cool. So he called into a weekend talk show between 2 to 4 p.m. and was awesome for 25 minutes. And he's got over 400,000 followers. And he was so humble. And he was saying how he was kind of like you, like he was a hardworking guy through his whole life and then got this big break. He's literally you of Twitter. Like he's like, and he was so cool. He was like, it's just kind of a midlife thing I'm doing now. Like that dude, I forget his name, but he runs that account. He was so cool, dude. Awesome.
Yeah, I like him. I enjoy Twitter. And Twitter, what's great is if you really want, when I wasn't working for about a year, I was getting severance pay from CBS. I got into Twitter.
Yes.
I mean, I've been on Twitter. Twitter just keeps you alive, even when you're off, even when you're not working. I am puzzled by a lot of guys that just do radio and don't do Twitter.
Oh, yeah,
because
totally.
most of your popular people, like you do Twitter, you've always done Twitter. You've been very, very good about your Twitter. You've never taken a day off, I don't think, from Twitter.
I've never taken a day off, and I'm careful about what I say. The people that have gotten canceled, like let's say who is my radio hero, but Anthony Cumia, like you can't say certain things. Kid Chris, a radio DJ out of Cincinnati who's been in many cities that I interviewed, he said it best. One time I was talking to him and I said, how do you get away with the things you say on air? And he goes, what are you talking about? And I was like, this morning you're talking about your co-host's mom giving out blowjobs. And he goes, no, I didn't. And I go, yeah, you did. And he was able to say what he said. And he goes, in our culture, you can't say things. He goes, you can't whip paint against the wall. He goes, you have to draw what you're saying. And I thought that was the most brilliant way of saying, you can say what you want to say, but you can't say it. You know what I mean?
Here's what you got to do. Yeah, here's what you got to do, too. The printed word will screw you more than the spoken word.
Forever.
For instance, I would say something, okay, on the radio in like 1995. And then, boom. And then 3 weeks later, Feeder prints something that somebody said, North said this 3 weeks ago, and the thing's brought up again. Now he blows it up.
Yeah.
Okay? So the printed word is what's gotten a lot of people in trouble. But now I think people are so super sensitive.
Oh, totally.
And like, look at Marcin Greco.
I know.
He's gone. He had an 18-month deal. Gone. And you know, between him and Cheryl Burton. I mean, I don't know what happened there. Apparently there was a grudge and stuff like that. I mean, out for blood. Cheryl's a public league kid. I would have liked if she could have worked it out with him. But Marcin Greco, a few times, more than 3 or 4 times in his career, has walked the tight wire, and he finally got knocked off it. I mean, so it's a dangerous time if you have your own mind. I'm a freedom-loving guy. I say as much as I can. But I do know, even back in 92 and 93, when I talked 10 miles a minute, 10 times faster than this, when I could read a 30-second copy in 15 seconds, and you know that, then that's when I still had a filter. But, man, in the 90s, I said everything. But, see, when you're with Dan Jiggets and you're with a black man, okay, and a prominent guy and a great guy, and you're a team, you can approach different topics depending on if you have 2 white guys, I think you're in more danger, honest to God. And I'm not an identity politics guy, but if you have 2 white guys, you got to be awfully careful now, because even these other shows, like Imus knew to bring in some diversity. Stern always has had diversity. I had diversity. You know what I'm saying, with Jiggs? And Jiggs had diversity with me. So I think, you know, and I was friends with Jesse Jackson and other people, you know. So, I mean, I got away with a lot compared to a lot of other people. But it helped me that I was from Chicago. I was a native son. And I was friends with everybody from Mayor Daley to Jesse Jackson.
Going back to what you were saying about Robert Feeder, now I've been reading his articles my whole life, but I can't pick up the energy of what he's like. Do radio people like him, or is he kind of a snitch? What's the overall vibe over the years that Robert Feeder's been in Chicago? What's the overall vibe of how TV and radio people view him?
Well, you know what? He made nothing but money because of me and Dahl and Mancow and a lot of people. But then he'd kick us in the balls too. Okay. And the radio people, I never gave a damn. I fired on him on the air, and he'd get even with me by writing something. But he also was very fair at times. He named me one of the top 10 most influential media people in Chicago history for the 90s. You know who he... But his paragraph about me, everybody else from Bill Curtis to Brandmeier to Oprah, all the people from Chicago in the 90s, was his paragraph that he wrote about them was elegant. He started mine off by saying, this ignorant loudmouth, you got to give him credit. That's how he started it. So I still got the column. He had me, though, ranked ahead of Oprah for most influential of the 90s in the city of Chicago. That's pretty cool. And I still got the article. So, but he never was a big... Robert and me was a love-hate relationship. I didn't back down to him. He didn't back down to me. And he doesn't write for the Sun-Times anymore or do anything like that anymore. But he was the media critic that people feared back then or people didn't like.
Well,
I know Warner Saunders could. I know Warner. I used to see him in NBC Tower all the time. He wasn't a fan.
Well, here's my thing, and this is inside baseball talk for radio. A lot of radio people, and this is off air, that have told me that have worked in the market, we're not a fan. So for people that are listening that don't know, he'll list the ratings, the rankings of morning shows, but he just has one demographic. So for people listening, there's 1834, 2554, and he posts like whatever the 6+ means, and then he'll post how many listeners for that ranking. So like if a show is really important for 2554 men, but it's in 14th place with 6+, he'll be like, that morning show is in 14th place. It's like, but for that demographic, but for what's making the money with Bud Light and all the sponsors, they're number one, they're top 5. And that's the one thing as an outsider looking in who has never had Robert Feeder cover him. He's never added me on Twitter. I've never spoken to him. That's my one little gripe with him, is the way that he'll be like, oh, they're in 14th place. I go, bro, but no, You know what I mean? Like, that's what's always annoyed me about him.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah. I'll never forget the first 3 months at the Score. We didn't have any ratings because Arbitron didn't know how to rate us because Stan figured out a 3-show station, and we were kicking everybody's butt, but we got no ratings. And Peter, mocked us, and
yeah,
he used to, and people used to leak stuff to Peter, like, hey, so and so. Well, so-and-so would call. So Peter was used by us, and he used us. It was a crazy relationship, but he was heavy-handed at times, but it didn't bother me. He couldn't, what? They still can't believe that what hit him when we showed up to Score. They still can't. None of them. They still can't believe it.
When it's all said and done, Mike, whenever you decide to hang up the headphones, what do you want your legacy to be in radio? Because I know everybody's going to have an opinion on it, and Robert Feeder will write an article about it. But when it's all said and done, coming from the voice of Mike North, coming from your mouth, what do you want it to be said?
That Danny Lee walked in one day to a hot dog stand, and I said, what are you going to do? And he said, I'm going to start a jazz station. I had read in Robert Feeder's column, WJZZ. I go, you're out of your mind. You should start a sports station. And that weekend he went home and he thought about it, and he bought the Sun-Times and Tribune, and he saw there was only 2 or 3 little ads on entertainment section for jazz. Then he looked at the sports section when the sports section had 50 pages in it, and he saw like 30, 40 ads. I'd like to be known as the guy whose vision was for the Score. Danny Lee started it, but I also brought a different type of. I would like to be known as a guy that was a Chicago guy that lived a dream when nobody else gave him a chance and kept it alive for a long period of time. Very fortunate. And I think if they don't say, they don't look. I don't think I'll ever get into Chicago Radio Hall of Fame. I'll never get in. I'm too despised by the mainstream people. Okay, I don't think the score is celebrating its 30th year. They're not in the station's not in the Hall of Fame. There shouldn't be one. Danny Lee's not in the Radio Hall of Fame, and he owns WXRT in the Score. How are you not? How's that guy not? Because it's all political.
The Radio Hall of Fame is just. They'll vote in people that currently have shows, and that's great. They vote in people that are like syndicated now, but then all the people that are like the pioneers of radio, they don't vote in. It's the weirdest thing. It's a popularity contest.
In Chicago, where they have the Radio Hall of Fame, WSCR is not in it.
Ridiculous. It's unreal. I mean, what are you talking about?
And by the way, here's what I'll tell everybody before I go. I'm going to let everybody know this. My vision was to start this sports station, but I didn't have the money. Danny Lee did it. He put it on. But I'm going to tell you something. They said we weren't going to last 6 months, and Ryan knows this. If you turn on 6-7 in the summertime this year, the Cubs are on it.
Yeah.
The Cubs. We weren't supposed to last 6 months. And 30 years later, my vision, Danny Lee's genius, along with Seth Mason, of hiring great people like Boris, McNeil, Jiggets, I mean, just great people. Tom Scher, Mike Murphy, Mike Greenberg, Jesse Rogers, names today, Jonathan Hood, guys still work, Fred Hubner. They're genius. They were music guys. Those guys got to be in the Hall of Fame. They started the #1 sports station in the country that was better than anybody else's, and it's still a standard bearer today.
Now, Mike, for people that have listened to this interview, where can they find everything you're up to?
All right, right. You could go to North to North, NORTH, the number 2 NORTH on Twitter. Please follow me. Then you got Win Daily Sports. I handicap for them every night. I'll give everybody a game tonight. I took a goal and a half. I took the Blackhawks playing tonight, but you got to pay like $200 to win 100. So be careful. Go light if you want. I think they'll cover that. And I'm also on Bears Barroom, where I do a podcast every Wednesday at 9:30. ESPN 1000, Friday nights at 7, Saturday mornings at 8.
Well, Mike, it's been an honor having you on the show. Growing up as a kid, I would listen to you and the various other shows in the market. And if you would have told me 20, 25 years ago that I would be interviewing you on my podcast, it would have been a fascinating idea, man. It's been a lot of fun having you on.
It's been a gas, man. I had a good time. You're a Chicago guy. I don't care where you live, kid. I went to a wedding at Key Largo last year. A little warm for me. I had to fly back. Hey, I love you, brother. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike.
All right.
All right, bye. And for everybody listening, that was the one and only Chicago sports legend, Mike North. Now, I grew up listening to Mike North, grew up listening to Mancow, Jonathan Brandmeier. Oops, I had that playing. So on this show, I am not a perfect man, as I am not perfect on this planet. And I had the song Game of Love by Santana playing before I was listening to the show. So that's why that was playing. But I have a show that's a similar format to the 1990s and 2000s radio. I grew up listening to Mancow, Brandmeier, Mike North, Eddie and Jobo. So check out my show. I say in the beginning of it that I record for the hardworking average Joe and Jane that grind in life. So go to every single major platform that has a podcast. Spotify, TuneIn, Spreaker, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Audible, and search up Hoppy Radio, HOPPE Radio. Tweet at me at Ryan Hoppy Radio. And you can go to my website for all the info, RyanHoppyRadio.com.